How would you react if your newly arrived teammate discovered a technical problem in a single race that you failed to detect throughout the season? What if that calls into question your ability as #1 driver of the most iconic team in history? At the Lusail circuit, while the sunset turned the track orange, Lewis Hamilton experienced one of those moments that define a driver's career, but also redefine the internal dynamics of an entire team. Qatar 2025 wasn't just a bad weekend. It was a brutal, surgical, and almost humiliating exposure of a truth that Ferrari did not want to see. The SF25 had a structural design flaw that no one, except a pilot with extreme sensitivity, was able to detect. And that's what Hamilton did. The reaction at Ferrari did not take long to arrive, but the person who felt it most was not an engineer or the team director. It was Charles Leclerc. Since Leclerc landed in Maranello in 2019, he had built more than just a relationship with Ferrari. He became the emotional heir of the Tifosi, the symbol of a reconstruction that had gone through multiple failures. Years of broken promises, unstable cars, erratic strategies. And yet, Charles remained. He fought. He fought the tide with an almost religious faith in the project. But everything changed in a single night. When Hamilton, a newcomer, still adapting, still exploring the limits of a car, identified in his first participation in Qatar a millimeter disconnection between the floor of the SF25 and its rear suspension system, the entire structure of trust that Leclerc had built shook. The Monegasque, accustomed to squeezing every gram out of the car, to pushing the limit to compensate for technical deficiencies, was left emotionally disarmed. It wasn't a matter of jealousy or even competition. It went deeper. It was the shock of realizing that perhaps he had been running blind, that his reading of the car had not only been insufficient, but had been eclipsed in a few days by someone who barely knew Ferrari's internal technical language. Leclerc, throughout 2025, had reported balance problems, instability in mid-corner, loss of grip in situations of extreme lateral loading. But his reports were intuitive, emotional, sometimes imprecise in technical language. Hamilton, on the other hand, broke down the problem with engineering precision. He described it as a momentary aerodynamic disconnection, a structural collapse that escaped the sensors and that could only be perceived at the exact moment in which the car crossed the critical lateral speed threshold. That kind of perception is not taught. He trains. It's gained through years of experience and understanding how a car feels beyond what the graphics show. And that left Charles completely exposed. The most painful thing was not that Hamilton was right. The most painful thing was that, by being right, he revealed the gap between the two. Not in talent, but in technical depth, in mechanical sensitivity. Able to lead, not just from speed, but from complete understanding of the package you are leading. From that moment, everything changed for Leclerc. Internally at Ferrari, Hamilton's words began to be heard more in technical meetings. Their feedback acquired greater specific weight. And although publicly the team defended parity, internally the narrative was shifting. Hamilton was not only the champion, it was the new reference point. And that for a driver like Charles, who has given everything for Ferrari and who has been the face of its resilience for years, was an emotional earthquake. The type of crack that is not noticeable in the wheels, but that could destabilize a rider from the inside. Lewis Hamilton did not make a simple observation from a cockpit. What he identified in Qatar was the kind of discovery that separates the champions from the talented. His technical diagnosis did not arise from a digital tool, nor from a simulator report, nor from a post-race analysis. It was born from the visceral contact between pilot and machine. A disconnection so subtle, so small, that no telemetry system captured it, but enough to completely compromise the performance of the SF25 under high-side loading conditions. During the sprint race, Hamilton felt a strange instability, an unexpected reaction from the rear axle every time he attacked fast corners with the car in full compression. That feeling was not new at Ferrari. In fact, several drivers, including Leclerc, had mentioned it during winter testing. But where others saw a balance problem, Hamilton went further. And he found the root. In technical language, what it detected was a temporary loss of aerodynamic load caused by a defective interaction between the floor of the car and the pull rod rear suspension system. Under normal racing conditions, this system remained within functional parameters. But when two factors combined extreme vertical load plus lateral forces when cornering, a slight structural flexing in the ground was generated, which altered the optimal geometry of the air flow under the car. This aerodynamic collapse did not last more than a few milliseconds. But in Formula One, milliseconds are the difference between stability and chaos. During that brief moment, the car lost suction. The ground effect was weakening, and with it, the effective contact between the chassis and the asphalt became unstable. That sensation, in Hamilton's own words, felt like the car was floating with no real connection to the ground. The impressive thing is not just that he felt it. The thing is that he was able to describe it with technical precision at the level of a track engineer. His report was so accurate that it forced Ferrari to dismantle the entire rear unit of the SF-25 to check if this hypothesis was real. And it was. The root of the problem was a microflexion of the new modular floor, a piece redesigned for 2025 with a lighter and more flexible compound which sought to gain performance on low-speed circuits. The objective was to improve corner entry and traction on slow exits. But in Qatar, a layout with high lateral energy corners like turn 13 or the 6-7-8 sequence, that choice became a technical boomerang. The ground flexed slightly more than expected, generating turbulence undetectable to the CFD and wind tunnel. Only Hamilton's sensitivity discovered it. And here comes the real impact. This anomaly went unnoticed not only by the sensors, but also by the entire engineering team. Which brings us to a fundamental debate about the limits of technology in Formula One. Because no matter how much you have access to terabytes of data in real-time, high-speed cameras, ultra-complex simulation models, there are sensations that only the driver can identify. Hamilton didn't just correct a flaw. It redefined the understanding of SF-25. And in the process, he set a new standard for feedback within Ferrari. His intervention changed the team's design priorities for the rest of the calendar, forcing a reconfiguration of the relationship between the aerodynamic design and the suspension system, and even causing parts of the simulation protocol to be rewritten. This finding is a perfect example of how F1, despite being on the verge of absolute automation, continues to depend on humans. Of sensitivity, of intuition, from the experience of those who can read a car as if it were an extension of their body. When the technical truth finally came to light, Ferrari had no choice but to publicly acknowledge it as a critical design flaw. But what was not said in press conferences, what was left out of the diplomatic language of official statements, was the devastating effect that revelation had on Charles Leclerc's morale and identity within the team. Because this episode wasn't just a glitch solved, it was an internal reordering of power. Charles Leclerc, for years, had been Ferrari's technical point of reference. Their feedback was law. His aggressive and surgical driving style had shaped the development of previous single-seaters. Even in moments of crisis, such as in the 2022 season or in the middle of 2024, his voice was the most heard in engineering meetings. He was the pilot who spoke the language of Maranello, the symbol of loyalty, of blind dedication to the shield of the prancing horse. But all that began to fade after Qatar. Internally, the team began to redraw its technical leadership dynamics. Hamilton's opinion, until then listened to with curiosity, began to be treated with reverence. Not only because of his name or his 7 world titles, but because of the level of precision with which he had dismantled a problem that no one else knew how to detect. In a few weeks, the perception changed. Where before it was said, let's wait and see what Charles says, now it was said, let's wait for Lewis's analysis. This invisible transformation generated a deep emotional fracture in Leclerc. This is not an open rivalry, nor a clash of egos. It is something quieter, more complex. The weight of feeling like your connection to the car is no longer enough. That the system has begun to revolve around another figure. And the worst, not because Charles failed, but because someone else was able to see further, deeper, clearer. From Qatar, Leclerc's reports began to show a pattern: insecurity. Where before it conveyed certainties, it now raised doubts. His body language with the engineers changed. He became more reserved, less direct. He began to question his own conclusions. And that kind of dissonance, in an environment as competitive as Ferrari, can be lethal. Because a driver who does not fully trust his voice cannot be the technical anchor of a team. When a driver feels that his reading of the car has been surpassed, that his warnings were not enough, that his place as a technical reference has been displaced by another, even if that other is a 7-time world champion, the wound is not only competitive, it is identity. Leclerc is no longer competing only against McLaren, against Red Bull, or against the stopwatch. Now he also competes against the shadow of his own prestige, against the idea of not having seen what he should have seen. And that can become unbearable for someone who has built his entire career on being the soul of Ferrari. Hamilton, for his part, has entered Ferrari with the silent authority of someone who does not need to impose himself with words. He does it with facts. with sensitivity. Precisely. And although this presence can raise the team's competitive ceiling, it also forces us to redefine internal dynamics. It's no longer enough to be fast. You have to be the reference. And that invisible, silent, but brutal battle is just beginning. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.